The name of the story, Campfire Confessions. Chapter 1, Sparks at the Campfire. The smell of pine needles and sunscreen lingered in the air, mixed with the faint smoke from the campfire ring that had burned low the night before. Tori Hale stood with her clipboard tucked under her arm, watching the chaos of first day arrivals unfold like a well-rehearsed play she had seen 100 times before. Vans pulled up the gravel road. Parents waved with both excitement and nerves, and children spilled out, some eager, some wide-eyed and hesitant, clutching stuffed animals like lifelines. This was her domain. Camp Cedarbrook had been her summer kingdom for 7 years, and she ran it with equal parts heart and precision. She knew which cabins creaked when you walked across the floor, which counselors needed a nudge to keep the kids moving on schedule, and which traditions always got the loudest cheers from campers. She also knew the unspoken rule she had carved deep into her own heart. No dating co-workers, no summer flings, no distractions. Camp came first. It had to. She adjusted her ball cap against the sun, calling out directions as a counselor jogged over. "The Bennett twins go to Cabin Maple," she reminded, and then turned toward a younger boy who looked like he might burst into tears at any second. "Hey there, buddy," she said gently, crouching so her eyes met his. "First time at camp?" The boy nodded, gripping the strap of his duffel bag so tightly his knuckles were white. "You'll love it. We've got the best Esmores in the state, and," she lowered her voice conspiratorially, "a lake that sometimes has a visiting turtle. If you're quiet, you might see him." The boy cracked the tiniest of smiles. "Victory." Tori gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder before pointing him toward his cabin. It was then she saw him. A tall man in a faded baseball cap stood near the registration table, one hand on his son's shoulder. He had the look of someone both nervous and determined, like he'd braced himself for this week. His son, brown-haired, shy-looking, clutched a sleeping bag that seemed twice his size. Tori glanced at the volunteer roster tucked in her clipboard. Nathan Carter, parent volunteer. Right? She remembered seeing his name when she'd scanned the list, not thinking much of it at the time. Parents volunteered occasionally. Usually it was moms with flexible schedules or retired dads looking for a little adventure. But this one, well, he was not what she'd pictured. Tori approached, switching on her camp director smile, the one that had calmed 100 anxious kids and nearly as many parents. "You must be Nathan Carter," she said, clipboard in hand. The man looked up. Up close, his eyes were a warm hazel, shadowed with the kind of tiredness that didn't come from lack of sleep alone. "Nate, actually," he corrected with a half-smile. "And this is Owen. First year for both of us." Owen ducked his head, mumbling something that sounded like hi. Tori crouched slightly, meeting the boy's eyes. "Welcome, Owen. Cabin Birch for you. Best counselors in camp. You'll make friend before dinner, I promise." The boy nodded, clearly not convinced, but willing to be led by her confidence. "And you," she added, turning to Nate, "are officially recruited. Volunteers get the same treatment as staff. Orientation's in the lodge at 4, but for now," she handed him a lanyard and a name badge. "You're mine to assign." "Mine to assign," he echoed with a soft laugh. "That sounds ominous." "Don't worry. I don't bite." It was supposed to be a light remark, the kind she tossed around daily. But the way Nate's smile caught, hesitant, genuine, made her pulse trip in a way she didn't expect. She turned brisk, covering the moment. "You any good with a bow?" "Archery? I've shot a couple arrows at a pumpkin once, years ago. Does that count?" Her eyes narrowed with mock gravity. "Good enough. Report to the archery range after lunch." The truth was, archery was always understaffed, and the kids loved it more than anything. She planned to send one of her senior counselors, but if Nate was willing, even as a rookie, he could at least keep order. "Copy that," he said, adjusting his son's sleeping bag. "Where do I drop him off?" "I'll walk you." They set off toward Birch Cabin, Owen trotting ahead. The gravel crunched beneath their shoes, cicadas buzzing in the heat of late morning. "So," Tori asked, keeping her tone casual, "what made you decide to spend a week wrangling mosquitoes and homesick kids? Glutton for punishment, maybe?" Nate's voice carried a smile, but when she glanced at him, his gaze had softened on Owen's back. "No, Truth is, he's my only kid. And it's just been the two of us for a while. I thought new experiences might help. Tori didn't push, though something in his paws tugged at her curiosity. People came to camp carrying invisible weights. She'd learned to sense them without prying. Well, she said gently, you picked the right place. We specialize in new experiences. At Birch Cabin, she introduced Owen to his counselors, then gave Nate a moment for goodbyes. She waited outside, pretending to check her clipboard but acutely aware of the man crouched low, speaking soft encouragement to his son. There was a tenderness in his tone that stirred something in her, something she quickly shook off. When Nate emerged, he exhaled hard, rubbing the back of his neck. That was harder than I thought. They all survive, Tori said. So do the parents. He chuckled, the tension easing from his shoulders. Guess that makes me camper number one. Something like that. She glanced at her watch. Come on, let's see how you handle arrows flying at your head. The afternoon sun slanted through tall pines when they reached the archery range. Targets lined the far end, painted with faded bullseyes. A dozen kids fidgeted with excitement, already gripping bows too big for their arms. Tori handed Nate a whistle. Rule number 1, no one touches an arrow until you say so. He raised a brow. What if they don't listen? They'll listen, she said with conviction. Or they'll face me. That seemed to amuse him, though he didn't doubt her. The first half hour was chaos. Kids loosing arrows into the dirt, bows dropping with alarming frequency. One near miss when a camper released too early. Nate blew his whistle so many times he joked he was part referee, part lifeguard. But he listened to Tori's quick instructions, learned the rhythm, and, most importantly, kept smiling even when a girl's arrow landed squarely in his shoe. You're a natural, Tori said, crossing her arms. He looked down at his scuffed sneaker, deadpan. If bleeding toes are part of the job, sure. But there was laughter in his eyes. Real laughter, not forced. It was the kind of sound that made Tori's chest loosen in ways she didn't want to admit. By the time the dinner bell rang, the kids were buzzing with stories of their bullseyes, most of which had landed nowhere near target. Nate walked beside Tori toward the lodge, blowing out a long breath. So be honest, he said. How bad was I? On a scale of 1 to complete disaster? She tilted her head thoughtfully. You're somewhere around didn't cause any lawsuits. That's a win. He laughed again, and this time she felt the warmth of it all the way to her fingertips. That night, after lights out, the camp quieted. Crickets sang, fireflies blinked along the tree line, and the lake shimmered under a half-moon. Tori did her usual rounds, flashlight in hand, checking cabins for restless kids or whispered mischief. When she reached the boathouse, she spotted a figure sitting alone at the dock, sneakers dangling just above the water. Nate. She considered leaving him to his solitude, but something held her feet to the gravel path. She walked down to the dock, her flashlight beam sweeping across the water before she clicked it off. Couldn't sleep? She asked. He glanced back, smiling faintly. Something like that. Needed a little quiet after a day of flying arrows and cafeteria food. Tori sat beside him, the wood cool beneath her. For a while, they just listened to the gentle lap of waves against the dock. You handled today well, she said at last. Most new volunteers don't last through archery without at least threatening to resign. I was tempted, he admitted, grinning. Then his expression softened. But, I don't know. It felt good, being part of something. Watching Owen laugh with the other kids. I haven't seen him do that much lately. Tori turned, studying him in the dim moonlight. There was a story there, sitting heavy in his voice, but she didn't press. Instead, she said quietly, that's what camp does. It pulls kids out of their shells. Sometimes adults, too. Nate's gaze lingered on her, long enough that she felt it, like the warmth of the fire, even from across the ring. Guess I'll find out, he murmured. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was alive, a space filled with crickets, water, and something unspoken between them. Tori forced herself to stand, brushing with dust from her shorts. Better get some sleep, volunteer. Tomorrow's canoe training. Try not to drown. He laughed softly, looking back at the rippling lake. No promises. The next day dawned bright and loud. Whistles blowing, counselors shouting wake-up calls, the dining hall buzzing with cereal and syrup. Tori, as always, was in the middle of it, clipboard tucked under her arm like an extra limb. She spotted Nate at breakfast, balancing 2 trays, his own and one piled high with pancakes for Owen, who looked much less timid than the day before. The boy even laughed when one of his cabin mates tried to stack gummy worms on top of his syrup. Tori caught herself smiling at the sight. Good. He's settling in. By mid-morning, Nate had been drafted into canoe training. He was steady enough on the water, though his paddle strokes lacked the finesse of someone who'd grown up around lakes. When one canoe tipped, dumping 2 boys into the shallow end, he waded in without hesitation, pulling them out with a grin and a shake of his head. The kids adored him instantly. Tori noted that too. The way he bent down to their level, laughed easily, never made them feel small. Some volunteers treated camp like babysitting. Nate seemed to understand the magic. That afternoon brought the first homesick camper of the week, a little girl with pigtails and tears streaming down her cheeks outside Cabin Spruce. Tori arrived to handle it, but Nate was already kneeling in the dirt, speaking softly. My first night away from home. I cried too, he told her, not caring that his knees were streaked with dust. Want to know a trick? If you look at the stars tonight, just imagine your mom and dad looking at the same ones. Makes you feel closer. The girl sniffled, hiccuped, and finally nodded. Tori felt the words land somewhere deep inside her. She'd comforted dozens of kids with practiced reassurance. Nate used something real. That evening, when the whole camp gathered around the fire pit, songs rose into the twilight. Silly chants, clapping games, and the inevitable off-key verse of Country Roads. The flames painted faces gold, the air rich with roasted marshmallows. Tori sat at the edge, watching as Nate nudged Owen into joining his song, clapping in rhythm until the boy sang out with the others. The joy on his face was unguarded, and Tori knew this was why Nate had come. When the last ember dimmed and the campers shuffled to bed, Tori lingered, stacking benches, making sure the fire was fully doused. She noticed Nate doing the same, working quietly beside her. Not bad for day 2, he said, glancing over. No major injuries. Only minimal sugar overload. Tori smirked. Give it time. Camp always finds new chaos. He leaned on the shovel he was using to stir ashes. I don't mind chaos. Sometimes it feels good, like proof you're really living. There was that flicker again, something beneath his words. Loss, maybe. A shadow of before. Tori didn't ask, but she met his eyes in the dark, the glow of the fire catching between them. Then you're in the right place, she said softly. And for a heartbeat, standing under the stars, the rule she had carved for herself. No dating co-workers, no exceptions, sounded shakier than it ever had before. Chapter 2, Storms and Surprises. The storm had been threatening all afternoon. By the time Tori wrapped up the nature hike, the horizon was already smeared with bruised clouds, and the air hung heavy, as if the whole camp was holding its breath. She hustled the kids back toward the lodge, her whistle sharp, her voice carrying over the rustle of leaves. Cabins, everyone! Hustle up! Let's beat the rain. A rumble of thunder answered her. Nate jogged at the back of the line, keeping stragglers moving. His hair was damp with humidity, his shirt clinging to his shoulders, but he looked more energized than winded. When the last camper disappeared into Birch Cabin, he turned to Tori with a crooked grin. Made it. Barely. She nodded, checking off names on her clipboard as the first drops began to fall. Looks like we're in for a long one. She wasn't wrong. Within minutes, rain sheeted down, drumming against rooftops, turning dirt paths into mud. Lightning forked across the lake, and thunder cracked so loud even the older kids yelped. Storms at camp were always a delicate dance. Keep the kids calm, keep them safe, distract them from the pounding sky. Tori moved from cabin to cabin, reassuring counselors, handing out board games and flashlights. By the time she reached Birch again, the rain was relentless. She slipped inside, brushing water from her cap. The cabin was a jumble of voices and nervous energy, kids clustered on bunks. Nate was crouched in the middle of it all, telling a story. And just when Nate thought the dragon would swallow him whole, What do you think happened? His sword lit up, one boy shouted. No, no. He ran away, another guessed. Nate widened his eyes dramatically. Actually, the dragon sneezed. Right in the knight's face. Boom! Fire and snot everywhere. The cabin erupted with laughter. Even Owen, usually quieter than the rest, doubled over with his friends. Tori leaned against the doorframe, unseen for a moment, and just watched. The storm raged outside, but in here the kids were safe, their fear replaced with giggles. And at the center was Nate, spinning silliness into comfort like he'd been doing it for years. When he noticed her, his smile softened. Hey, Director Hale. Hope we're not violating any camp rules about dragon mucus. Technically, it's in the handbook, she deadpanned. Section 5. Right after don't poke raccoons. The kids laughed again, and Nate gave her a look that warmed her more than the cabin's lantern glow. The night wore on. The storm refused to let up. When lightning struck close enough to flicker the lights, a counselor ducked in, rain streaming from her jacket. Tori, we got a leak in cabin spruce. The roof's dripping right onto 2 bunks. Can't keep the kids in there. Tori's mind snapped into problem-solving mode. Move them here, she said. Birch has space. Within minutes, Spruce's campers tumbled into the cabin, bedding and backpacks clutched tight. The room grew louder, messier, but the alternative was worse. Safety first. She glanced at Nate, expecting weariness, maybe frustration. Instead, he shrugged, already helping a girl spread her sleeping bag in the corner. Guess it's a party, he said. And just like that, Birch Cabin became a storm shelter. 20 kids, 3 counselors, Nate and Tori. The rain hammered, the wind howled, but inside there was singing, whispered jokes, the occasional flash of flashlight tag. Hours later, when the last child finally drifted into uneasy sleep, Tori sat near the door, listening to the storm. Nate lowered himself onto the bench beside her, his voice low so as not to wake anyone. Quite the first camp storm for me. You handled it. He shook his head, chuckling softly. You handled it. I just told bad dragon stories. They worked, she said, glancing at the rows of sleeping kids. That's what matters. Silence stretched, filled by rain and thunder. Then Nate spoke again, more carefully. Owen's mom. She used to be the storyteller. Bedtime, long car rides, she always had something. When she got sick, I tried, but I was never as good at it. Tonight was the first time I felt like maybe I was getting closer. Tori's breath caught. He hadn't said much about his past, but the weight in his voice filled in the blanks. Widowed, raising Owen alone, carrying memories that still ached. She wanted to reach for his hand, but her own rule rose like a wall in her chest. No lines crossed. Not here. Not with him. Instead, she said softly, you did more than you know tonight. For him. For all of them. Nate met her gaze in the dim light. And for a moment, the storm outside felt quieter than the thunder between them. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving camp soggy but sparkling. Puddles dotted the paths, pine needles stuck to boots, and the air was fresh in a way that only followed heavy rain. The kids, restless for being cooped up, bolted outside the moment breakfast ended. Staff rallied them into scavenger hunts and relay races, burning energy before it could spiral into mischief. Tori should have been exhausted, but the truth was she wasn't. Not really. She'd barely slept, yet she felt strangely light, as if the long night in Birch Cabin had shifted something. She noticed Nate across the field, helping a group of boys build a makeshift obstacle course out of logs. Owen was there too, laughing openly, cheeks flushed with the kind of joy that only came from belonging. It tugged at her, watching them together, father and son, healing in real time. Later that day, as she organized the waterfront rotation, Nate approached with a towel slung around his neck. His hair was damp, his shirt plastered from an earlier canoe mishap. Do I earn extra points for not flipping an entire boat? He asked. You get half a point, Tori replied, but you lose it for soaking yourself. He grinned, shaking his head. Tough judge. The way he said it, light, teasing, sent an unexpected warmth through her. She forced herself back to business, scribbling notes on her clipboard. That evening, the whole camp gathered again at the fire ring. The counselors had planned skits, as always, goofy routines with exaggerated pratfalls and silly songs. The kids adored it, shrieking with laughter at every over-the-top moment. Then came the final act, an improvised play by Birch Cabin's boys. Ladies and gentlemen, one boy announced with mock seriousness, "We present to you the wedding of the century." Tori stiffened immediately. She'd seen this before. Kids loved poking fun at crushes or pairing people off. Sure enough, two campers had tied a towel around another boy's shoulders as a makeshift veil. Another marched with a stick like a preacher's staff. And then, oh no, two more dragged Nate into the center, one on each arm. The crowd erupted in cheers. "Mr. Nate is the groom," a boy declared, pointing grandly. "And his bride is Miss Tori," the kids roared. Tori froze, her pulse leaping to her throat. Before she could react, one of the girls swept up beside her, looping a chain of daisies over her head like a crown. "You have to. It's the rules." Nate's face was a mixture of amusement and embarrassment, but he didn't fight it. He looked at Tori across the firelight, and something unspoken passed between them. Half humor, half something deeper neither dared name. This ceremony was a whirlwind of nonsense vows, invented promises to provide unlimited marshmallows, and a finale where the kids demanded they hug to seal it. Tori kept it light, laughing as she gave Nate the briefest, most professional side hug possible. The campers cheered like it was the grand finale of a Broadway show. But when she pulled back, her heart was hammering. Not because of the joke, but because of how close he'd been, the warmth of his arm against hers, the look in his eyes when the kids shouted their approval. The skit ended, the fire was doused, and the kids shuffled to bed, still giggling about the wedding. But long after, Tori lay awake in her cabin, staring at the ceiling. The no-dating rule had always been her anchor, her shield. But tonight, for the first time, it felt like a chain. The camp settled into silence. The only sounds the hum of crickets and the distant lap of waves against the dock. Tori made her last round with her flashlight, double-checking doors and windows, the same routine she'd done for years. Usually it calmed her. Tonight, her mind was anything but calm. She found Nate outside Birch Cabin, sitting on the steps, elbows on his knees. The lantern light from inside cast him in a soft glow. "Thought you'd be asleep by now," she said. He looked up, smiling faintly. "After that wedding, hard to top a day like this." Tori rolled her eyes, though a reluctant laugh escaped. "Kids will be kids." "They were having fun," Nate said. Then, more quietly, "But it did make me think." She froze. "About what?" He hesitated, then shrugged, gaze turning toward the trees. "About how life surprises you. How 1 minute you're just trying to survive a thunderstorm, and the next, you're standing across a campfire from someone who makes you wonder, what if?" The words hung in the night air, heavier than thunder. Tori's heart pounded. She wanted to answer. She wanted to admit she'd been wondering the same thing since that first walk to the cabins. But the old rule rose up inside her, stubborn and unyielding. No dating at camp. "Nate." Her voice came out softer than she intended. "This place has lines. Boundaries. I can't cross them." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Not hurt, not angry, just understanding. "I get it," he said. "Really. But just so you know, I'm glad I'm here. Not just for Owen. For me, too." The honesty in his voice unraveled something in her chest. She couldn't answer, not the way she wanted to. So she just nodded, forcing herself to step back, to retreat into the safety of her own rules. "Good night, Nate." "Good night, Tori." As she walked away, the night pressed close around her. The camp was quiet, the kids were safe, and every star above seemed to burn brighter after the storm. But her heart was louder than the crickets, carrying a truth she couldn't silence. The boundary she'd clung to all these years was starting to feel less like protection, and more like something breaking. Chapter 3: Embers of Something Real. The last days of camp always carried a bittersweet hum. The kids were louder, clingier, trying to cram every last memory into their remaining hours. Counselors were exhausted, but secretly sentimental, already mourning the moment the cabins would go quiet. And for Tori Hale, The rhythm of packing, cleaning, and farewells was as familiar as breathing. But this year, something was different. She caught herself watching Nate cart her more than she should. Watching the way he tied Owen's shoelaces without fuss. The way he carried canoes with ease. The way his laugh reached every corner of a room. He wasn't just a volunteer anymore. He had become part of the camp's heartbeat. And part of hers. She hated admitting that. Rules were rules. She'd written them for a reason. But lately, every time she looked at him, the line blurred a little more. On the second-to-last evening, the camp gathered for one of its most cherished traditions, the memory fire. Each cabin prepared short reflections, silly stories, favorite moments, sometimes heartfelt words about new friends and conquering fears. The fire blazed tall, sparks rising like tiny stars. When it was Birch Cabin's turn, Owen stepped forward. His voice wavered at first, but then steadied, stronger than Tori had ever heard it. "My favorite part of camp," he said, eyes flicking toward Nate, "was seeing my dad laugh again." The group hushed. Even the crickets seemed to pause. Nate's breath caught audibly. He swallowed, blinking fast, while the kids cheered and clapped around Owen. Tori felt her throat tighten. She knew then, whatever lines she'd drawn for herself, whatever rules she'd used to guard her heart, there was no denying the truth anymore. Nate wasn't just healing his son here. He was healing himself. And maybe if she was brave enough, he could heal something in her too. Later that night, long after the campers had gone to bed, Tori found Nate by the lake. He was skipping stones across the still water, his posture thoughtful in the moonlight. She approached quietly. "Your son stole the show tonight." Nate smiled faintly. "Yeah, he surprises me every day." He paused, then added, "Guess he gets that from his mom." She was full of surprises. It was the first time he'd spoken of her so openly. Tori waited, letting him go on if he chose. "She was sunshine," he said, his voice low but steady. "Loud laugh, bigger heart. When she got sick, everything dimmed. Owen and we've been stumbling in the dark since. But here," he gestured toward the cabins, toward the glowing embers of the fire, still visible in the distance. "For the first time in years, I feel like we found a little light again." Tori's chest ached, full and fragile all at once. She wanted to reach for him. She wanted to tell him she felt it too. That light, that shift, that possibility. But the words tangled with the rule she'd been repeating for so long it felt carved in stone. No dating at camp. She almost said it aloud like an incantation. But instead, she whispered, "I'm glad you're here, Nate." He turned, eyes meeting hers in the moonlight. "So am I." The air between them was charged, alive with everything they weren't saying. For a heartbeat, it seemed the rule might shatter right then and there. But a counselor's distant whistle broke the spell, calling across the field for lights out. Tori stepped back, her voice shaky. "We should get some rest." Nate nodded, but the look in his eyes lingered long after they parted. The last morning of camp always felt like controlled chaos. Suitcases dragged across gravel paths, parents' cars lined up in crooked rows, counselors shouted directions while kids scrambled for missing socks and autographed camp t-shirts. It was loud, messy, a little heartbreaking, and Tori knew it like the back of her hand. But this year, her chest felt heavier. She stood by the lodge, clipboard in hand, greeting parents as they arrived. Owen spotted his grandmother first and bolted into her arms, words tumbling out about archery, canoe flips, and the legendary dragon sneeze. Nate followed at a slower pace, lugging the boy's duffel bag. When he reached Tori, he set the bag down with a soft thud. "So, that's it." She forced a smile. "That's it. You survived a week of camp." "Barely." His grin was crooked, but his eyes were warm. "Though I think Owen might never stop talking about it." "That's the goal," Tori said. "Give them stories they'll carry home." He hesitated then, as if searching for words. Parents and kids bustled around them, but the space between them felt private, like the world had stepped aside for a moment. "Tori, I know you've got your rules, and I respect that, but I don't want to leave here without saying." He stopped, exhaled. "I don't remember the last time I laughed this much, or felt this seen. You did that. For me. For Owen. And well, I didn't want to go without you knowing." Her heart twisted. She wanted to answer, wanted to tell him she felt the same, that the rule was the only thing holding her back. But her throat locked. Around them, campers hugged their friends goodbye. Cars honked. A counselor tripped over a suitcase. She swallowed hard. Nate. But before she could finish, Owen tugged on his father's sleeve, demanding he come see something in the car. Nate gave her one last look, hopeful, patient, yet braced for disappointment, before following his son. And then they were gone. Just like that. The parking lot emptied. Cabins stood hollow, the echo of laughter fading into the trees. Camp Cedarbrook was quiet again, the way it always was after departure day. Tori walked the paths one last time, clipboard forgotten at her side. The rule had always protected her from mistakes, from messy entanglements, from heartbreak. But now, as she stood in the stillness of camp, it felt less like protection and more like a prison of her own making. She let him leave without telling him the truth. Tori lingered near the empty fire pit that evening, the last remnants of camp smoldering into embers. The air smelled of pine and smoke, cool and quiet after a week of chaos and laughter. She sank onto a bench, thinking about the week. The kids, the storms, the archery mishaps, the silly wedding skit that had unexpectedly left her heart racing. A soft voice broke the silence. Tori. She turned. Nate stood a few steps away, holding a single bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked along the path. His eyes were tired but warm, hopeful in a way that made her chest tighten. "I couldn't leave without saying goodbye properly," he said, "and maybe seeing if you feel the same way I do." Her heart skipped. The rules, the warnings she'd carried all summer, threatened to rise again. But the week had shown her something she couldn't ignore. Boundaries only mattered if they kept her from something real. She smiled, letting herself step closer. Ido. Relief washed over his face, softening the lines of exhaustion. He handed her the bouquet, awkwardly, but sincerely. "I was hoping you might. I didn't want to assume, didn't want to overstep." "You didn't," she said, brushing her fingers over the flowers. "I just needed to see it for myself. This week, it's been enough. Enough to realize that sometimes rules are meant to be broken for the right reasons." Nate chuckled softly. "Good to know, because I'm not leaving without a proper ending." Proper ending. They walked together toward the lake, the fire pit glowing faintly behind them. Crickets sang, the breeze rustled leaves, and the water mirrored the half-moon. For a moment, the world felt suspended, peaceful, perfect. "I wasn't sure I'd be ready for this," Tori admitted, glancing at him. "A new connection, a second chance, it's scary." "Life's scary sometimes," Nate said, taking her hand gently. "But worth it, especially with the right person." Tori let herself squeeze his hand in return, the warmth settling deep into her chest. She didn't need to overthink, didn't need to overplan. For the first time in a long time, she could just feel. The quiet stretched, comfortable and safe, broken only by the soft lapping of water at the dock. "Promise me something?" Nate asked. "Anything," she said. "That this isn't just a camp thing. That we try for real. After the summer ends, after the chaos." Tori smiled, the weight of her old rules lifting. "I promise." And with that, the weeks. Tension, the storm, the chaos, and the laughter all fell away, leaving only the two of them by the lake. Two people who had found something unexpected amid archery accidents, homesick kids, and campfire confessions, a spark that had grown into something real. The night was calm, the stars above blinking like tiny witnesses. Nate leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and Tori realized the truth she'd been avoiding all summer. Some rules were worth bending, some risks worth taking, especially when they led to this. The first kiss was gentle, shy, and perfect, and for the first time in years, Tori felt completely, unequivocally at home. Camp Cedarbrook was quiet now, but the embers of that week, laughter, love, and new beginnings, would burn bright for both of them long after the campers had gone. And so, under the half-moon and the whispering pines, Tori and Nate started the next chapter together. One neither rules nor storms could ever dim. End of story. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.